Here's something that will change how you see every sunrise. Right now, as you listen to these words, you are participating in the most important battle in existence, not metaphorically. The ancient Egyptians believed that without human prayers, without daily rituals, without ordinary people speaking protective spells, the sun god Ra would fail in his nightly journey through the underworld. The serpent of chaos, Apep, would swallow him. And when that happened, it wasn't just that the sun wouldn't rise. Creation itself would begin to unravel. Matter would lose its structure, time would stop flowing. The universe would collapse back into the primordial void from which it had emerged. Total annihilation. The end of everything that ever was or could be. And the terrifying part, the battle has been fought billions of times, and Apep has never truly lost, because it cannot lose. It cannot be killed. It simply retreats, heals, and returns the next night, and the night after that, forever. But here's the twist that makes this mythology extraordinary. The god who saved creation every single night, who stood between existence and oblivion, who fought the chaos serpent when all other gods were paralyzed by its power, was Set. Yes, that Set. The one who would later be cast as mythology's ultimate villain, the murderer of Osiris, the embodiment of evil itself. In the earliest Egyptian traditions, Set was the hero, the only hero strong enough to matter. And the question of why he transformed from savior to demon reveals something profound about how myths evolve, how victors write history, and how the same force can be simultaneously necessary and dangerous. Tonight, let your breathing slow as we descend into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and witness the most consequential journey in all of ancient mythology. This isn't the story you learned in school. This is what the ancient Egyptians actually believed, carved on tomb walls meant to guide the dead, recited in temples at dawn to help the sun rise, woven so deeply into their civilization that every aspect of their society, from law to architecture to daily life, was built around this single cosmic truth. Order is fragile, chaos is eternal, and existence itself requires constant, exhausting, never-ending defense. Tonight, let your breathing slow as we descend into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and witness the most consequential journey in all of ancient mythology. A journey that happens not once, but every single night, from the beginning of time until its end. A journey so essential to Egyptian thought that they carved its details onto tomb walls, inscribed it in sacred texts, and performed daily rituals to ensure its success. The story you think you know about Egyptian gods and the underworld is just the surface. Beneath it lies something far more complex and fascinating, a cosmology that understood the universe as an eternal cycle of death and renewal, where even the gods must struggle, suffer, and be reborn. Close your eyes if you're ready to sleep, or settle into a comfortable position as we travel back more than 3,000 years to understand how the ancient Egyptians envisioned the most important journey in existence, the nightly voyage of Ra through the realm of death itself. The solar Barque, vessel of eternity. Before we can descend into the underworld, we must first understand the vessel that carries the sun god through both sky and darkness. This is no ordinary boat. The ancient Egyptians called it the manjet, the boat of millions of years, though in truth there were two sacred barques. During the 12 hours of daylight, Ra sailed across the sky in the manjet, his morning boat, bringing light and warmth to the world of the living. But as the sun touched the western horizon, as the sky blazed with the colors of ending day, a transformation occurred. The boat changed. Ra himself changed. Everything changed as the boundary between life and death drew near. The evening barque was called the Mesektet, and it was this vessel that would carry Ra through the 12 hours of night, through the 12 regions of the Duat, through challenges that would test divine power itself. The ancient texts describe this boat in practical terms, borrowed from the physical boats that sailed the Nile, with a prow and stern, oars and a rudder. But the materials, the texts suggest, existed before creation itself. Based on various accounts, scholars interpret references to the boat being formed from Ra's own essence, or crafted by Ptah, at the moment of creation, though the sources remain deliberately ambiguous, as if some mysteries were meant to stay hidden even in sacred texts. Here's what the texts make absolutely clear, though. This boat was more than transportation. It was a moving fortress, a floating temple, an island of order sailing through an ocean of chaos. And here's the fascinating part that reshapes how we understand Egyptian cosmology. The boat itself represented Ma'at, cosmic order, maintaining a bubble of reality and law in a realm where neither fully applied. This wasn't just symbolic. The Egyptians believed the boat's physical presence in the Duat was what prevented that entire realm from collapsing into pure chaos. The very act of the boat moving forward asserted structure against formlessness, time against timelessness, light's memory even in absolute darkness. Without the boat, the Duat itself would become uninhabitable, even for the dead. The underworld needed the sun god's nightly journey as much as the living world did. As Ra prepared to descend into the Duat each evening, his form began to shift. The ancient Egyptians understood their gods as beings who could take multiple forms, aspects that revealed different powers and purposes. During the day, Ra was depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with the solar disk, radiant and powerful. But as he entered the underworld, artistic depictions and texts consistently show him transformed into his ram-headed aspect, known as Auf or Ifu, meaning flesh or corpse. The hieroglyph for Ba, soul, was the same as the hieroglyph for Ram, suggesting this form represented Ra separated from his body, existing only as soul, as essence without power. The texts describe this transformation in remarkably physical terms. Ra is depicted as aged, bent, with trembling limbs and weakened voice. He is no longer the triumphant solar deity who rises each morning. He has become a god facing mortality, experiencing vulnerability, undergoing the same passage through death that every Egyptian soul would eventually make. And here's why this mattered so profoundly. If even Ra, the creator and sustainer of all existence, must face death's weakness, then death wasn't a failure or punishment. It was a necessary stage in the cycle of existence. The mightiest of gods experienced dependency, needed help, couldn't survive alone. This fundamentally shaped how Egyptians understood community, mutual support, and the relationship between the powerful and the vulnerable. Even kings must eventually become weak. Even the sun must die before it can be reborn. The boat's crew assembled as twilight deepened. Various gods and goddesses, each with specific roles and powers, took their positions aboard the vessel. This was not a journey Ra could make alone, no matter how powerful he had been at the height of day. The underworld demanded defenders, guides, magical protectors who could navigate its treacherous waters and fend off the horrors that waited in the darkness. The composition of this crew varied somewhat depending on which text or which era you consult. Egyptian mythology evolved over thousands of years, and different regions emphasized different deities. But certain figures appear consistently, their roles too important to omit. At the helm or prow of the boat, depending on the account, stood Set, the god of storms, chaos, and the desert, wielding his iron spear. Now, if you know Egyptian mythology at all, you're probably confused. Set? The murderer of Osiris? The enemy of cosmic order? The embodiment of violence and chaos? That Set defending the sun god and saving creation? Yes. And here's where the story gets fascinating and reveals something crucial about how mythology evolves and how power shapes the stories we tell. In the earliest traditions surrounding Ra's journey, in the text from the Old and Middle Kingdoms, Set wasn't just a defender. He was the defender, the only god strong enough and fierce enough to face Apep directly. While other gods could be paralyzed by Apep's hypnotic gaze, Set remained immune. While other gods' weapons couldn't pierce Apep's scales, Set's iron spear could wound the chaos serpent. While other gods might hesitate or fear, Set charged forward, driven by a ferocity that matched Apep's own malevolence. His association with chaos and violence became an asset in the underworld, where those very qualities were needed to combat the greatest threat to order itself. You needed someone who understood chaos to fight chaos. You needed someone comfortable with violence to face ultimate violence. But here's the twist that makes this so much more than just an interesting historical note. Set's transformation from cosmic hero to cosmic villain didn't happen because the myths changed randomly. It happened because of politics, foreign invasions, and propaganda. When the Hyksos, foreign rulers, took control of parts of Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, they adopted Set as their patron deity because he was the god of foreigners and outsiders. After native Egyptian rulers eventually expelled the Hyksos, Set became associated with foreign occupation, with enemies, with everything threatening to Egyptian order. Later myths recast him as the murderer of Osiris, the enemy of Horus, a force of pure evil. The hero who had saved creation every night became the villain who destroyed the rightful king. Same god, completely different story. All because of who was writing the myths and what political purposes they served. Isis, the great magician, brought her formidable powers of Heka, Egyptian magic, to protect the boat and its divine passenger. Her spells could heal, ward off evil, and bind enemies. When Apep's hypnotic gaze threatened to paralyze the gods, it was often Isis's magic that broke the enchantment. When the serpent's coils wrapped around the boat, trying to stop its progress, Isis's words of power could loosen those terrible bonds. Mehen, whose name means coiled one, was himself a serpent deity, sometimes depicted as wrapped around Ra's cabin in a protective coil, shielding the weakened sun god from attack. Here we see one of those fascinating contradictions that Egyptian mythology embraced without difficulty. Serpents could be both protective and threatening, both allies of order and agents of chaos. Mehen represented the protective aspect of serpentine power, using the form of a snake to defend against the ultimate serpent. Sia represented divine perception and wisdom, who embodied authoritative utterance and divine command, and Heka was the personification of magic itself. These abstract concepts took divine form and served essential functions aboard the Barque. They represented the intellectual and magical tools needed to navigate the underworld, to understand its challenges and speak the words of power that would see the boat safely through. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the crew, the detail that reframes the entire Egyptian understanding of death and the afterlife, was the presence of the justified dead. These weren't passive spirits waiting in paradise. They were active participants, defenders, warriors in the cosmic struggle. Those souls who had passed through judgment and been found worthy didn't retire to some eternal rest. They joined Ra's crew and fought Apep every single night. Spell 80 of the coffin texts explicitly grants this ability, this responsibility, this honor. Think about what this means. Death, in Egyptian thought, wasn't retirement from the cosmic struggle. It was promotion to the front lines. You lived your life trying to uphold Ma'at, truth and justice and order. You died and faced judgment. If you passed, if your heart weighed lighter than the feather, your reward wasn't escape from duty, but the opportunity to defend creation directly. To stand alongside gods, to face the ultimate enemy of existence itself. Every person who had ever lived well and died righteously was now aboard that boat, facing Apep. The Chaos Serpent faced not just a handful of gods, but the accumulated righteousness of all human history, every just person who had ever lived, all fighting together. This created something profound. It meant that the living, the dead, and the gods were all engaged in the same essential struggle, all necessary to each other, all bound together in defending existence against chaos. Your grandmother who died righteously was literally helping Ra right now, tonight, every night. The connection between the living and the dead wasn't metaphorical or sentimental. It was tactical, essential, real. This is why Egyptians were so obsessed with proper burial, with tomb texts, with supplying the dead with what they needed. Not just to keep them comfortable, but to ensure they could fulfill their role in defending creation. The boat would pause at the western horizon, at the place where sky met, earth met underworld. A liminal space the Egyptians called the Akhet. Sometimes this was described as a gate, sometimes as a door, sometimes as a mountain where the sun descended. The geography was necessarily vague because this was a place that existed at the boundary of creation, where the physical world gave way to the realm of death and transformation. And then, as the last light faded from the sky, as darkness claimed the land of Egypt, the boat of Ra began its descent into the Duat, into 12 hours that would determine the fate of creation, into waters where the serpent waited with jaws that could swallow the world. The divine crew, defenders of light, to fully understand the nightly battle between order and chaos, we must know the defenders who stood between Ra and annihilation. Each god aboard the solar barque brought unique powers, and their presence reveals how the ancient Egyptians understood the multifaceted nature of survival, protection, and the struggle to maintain Ma'at in the face of overwhelming darkness. Set, the god of the desert, storms and foreigners, occupied the most crucial defensive position. In later Egyptian history, particularly during and after the conflicts with the Hyksos invaders, Set's reputation would become thoroughly tarnished. He would be cast as the murderer of Osiris, the enemy of Horus, a god associated with violence, confusion, and foreignness in ways that made him increasingly uncomfortable for Egyptian theology. But in the earlier strata of myth, in the texts that dealt with Ra's journey through the Duat, Set was unambiguously heroic, the champion without whom dawn could not come. The reasons for Set's effectiveness against Apep were multiple. First, Set was associated with the desert, with that vast wasteland beyond the fertile Nile Valley that Egyptians viewed as a realm of chaos and danger. He was comfortable with chaos, understood it, could move within it without losing himself. Where other gods might be paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the Duat's deepest regions, Set felt at home. Second, Set possessed enormous physical strength, described in some texts as being unmatched among the gods. When Apep's coils wrapped around the boat, Set could physically tear them away. When the serpent lunged to strike, Set could meet force with force. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Set was immune to Apep's greatest weapon, the hypnotic gaze. Multiple texts describe how Apep would use its serpentine eyes to freeze the gods, inducing a paralyzing trance that left them helpless. Set alone could resist this power, whether through sheer willpower or because his own chaotic nature made him resistant to Apep's chaos-inducing abilities. This meant that even when all other defenders were temporarily disabled, Set could continue the fight, could keep Apep at bay until the others recovered, or Isis's magic could break the spell. The image of Set standing at the prow of the boat, iron spear in hand, braced against the attack of the Chaos Serpent, became iconic in Egyptian art. Tomb paintings show him thrusting his weapon into Apep's flesh, or standing triumphant over the wounded serpent. The symbolism was clear. Chaos could be fought with strength and determination, evil could be met with violence when necessary, and sometimes the guardians of order needed to possess some understanding of disorder to effectively combat it. Isis brought a different kind of power to the defense of Ra. As one of the greatest magicians in the Egyptian pantheon, her knowledge of Heka, the fundamental magic that underlay all existence, was profound. Egyptian magic wasn't supernatural in the way we might think of it today. It was understood as a natural force, one of the fundamental powers that had existed since creation. Heka had been present when Atum first rose from the waters of Nun and spoke creation into being. It was the power of words, of names, of knowing the true nature of things and being able to command them through that knowledge. Isis had spent eons learning the secret names and hidden nature of things. In one famous myth, she even tricked Ra himself into revealing his true name, gaining power over the sun god. This knowledge made her uniquely qualified to protect Ra during his vulnerable passage through death. Her spells could heal injuries, could cleanse corruption, could bind hostile forces. When Apep sought to flood the boat with the dark waters of the underworld, Isis could command those waters to recede. When the serpent's venom threatened to poison Ra, Isis knew the counterspells and healing incantations. But Isis's role went beyond combat magic. She was also associated with mourning, death, and resurrection. She had, after all, searched for the dismembered pieces of Osiris and reassembled him, bringing him back to life long enough to conceive Horus. This connection to death and rebirth made her presence on the night Barque particularly appropriate. She represented the possibility that death was not final, that what seemed destroyed could be made whole again, that the journey through darkness could lead to light. The texts describe her voice as powerful, her words as binding. When she spoke a spell, reality itself bent to accommodate her will, at least within the constraints of Ma'at. She could not break the fundamental laws that governed existence, but within those laws, her power was formidable. The seventh hour of night, when Apep's attack was strongest, often featured Isis prominently, her magic combining with Set's physical force to create an impenetrable defense. Mehen, the coiled serpent, represented a fascinating principle: the use of serpentine power to defend against serpentine threat. His very form mirrored Apep's, but where Apep embodied chaos and destruction, Mehen embodied protection and enclosure. The ancient Egyptians seem to have understood that sometimes you need to fight fire with fire, or in this case, serpent with serpent. Mehen is depicted coiled around Ra's shrine or cabin on the boat, his body forming protective barriers through which Apep could not strike. This wasn't passive defense. Mehen could strike out at threats, could use his own coils to intercept Apep's, could essentially wrestle with the Chaos Serpent, while the other gods attacked from different angles. The Egyptian board game called Mehen, which featured a spiral track shaped like a coiled serpent, was thought to be inspired by this protective deity's role aboard Ra's Barque. The trio of Sia, Hu, and Heka represented more abstract but equally essential forms of protection. Sia, divine perception, ensured that threats could be seen and understood before they became overwhelming. In the darkness of the Duat, where normal senses might fail, Sia provided insight, the ability to perceive what was hidden to anticipate attack, to understand the nature of the challenges each hour presented. Hu, authoritative utterance, gave voice to commands that could not be ignored. When Hu spoke, his words carried the weight of cosmic law, the authority of creation itself. He could command hostile spirits to stand aside, could order the gates of the Duat to open, could declare Ra's right to pass through death and reach rebirth. In a universe where words had power, where knowing something's true name gave you authority over it, Hu's role was indispensable. Heka, magic personified, augmented and empowered all the other magical workings on the boat. When Isis cast a spell, Heka magnified it. When protective words were spoken, Heka gave them force. The presence of magic itself, as a conscious divine entity, ensured that the boat was surrounded by an aura of power that could resist the anti-magical, chaos-inducing influence of Apep and the deeper Duat. Other deities appeared in various accounts. Neith, the ancient goddess associated with war and weaving, brought her protective powers. Serpent, the scorpion goddess, whose venom could kill or cure depending on her will, stood ready to defend Ra. Ma'at herself, the personification of cosmic order, sometimes appeared, her very presence reminding all that the struggle was not just about physical survival, but about maintaining the fundamental balance of existence. And then there were the justified dead, the souls who had passed through judgment and been deemed worthy of paradise. Their presence on the boat served multiple purposes. First, it meant that the living and the dead were united in the defense of cosmic order, that death did not separate one from the cosmic community, but rather changed one's role within it. Second, it gave hope to the living. If you lived according to Ma'at, if you spoke truth and did justice and maintained balance, you might one day join this divine crew, fighting alongside the gods themselves. Third, and perhaps most practically, it meant Ra's defenders were innumerable. Apep might be vast and powerful, but arrayed against it were not just a handful of gods, but all the justified dead of Egyptian history, every soul that had successfully navigated judgment and earned paradise. The Chaos Serpent faced not just divine power, but the accumulated righteousness of generations. This crew, diverse in power and purpose but united in goal, stood ready as the boat descended into darkness. They would need every ounce of their combined strength, every trick of magic they knew, every weapon at their disposal. Because ahead, in the deepest hours of night, coiled in the darkest waters of the Duat, Apep waited with hunger that had never been satisfied and never would be, hunger for the extinction of light itself. Into darkness, the 12 hours of night. The solar barque did not simply sail through a featureless underworld. The Duat was structured, divided into 12 regions that corresponded to the 12 hours of night. Each hour had its own geography, its own guardians, its own challenges and wonders. These divisions were not arbitrary. They represented stages in the process of death and rebirth, tests that Ra must pass, thresholds he must cross to reach the eastern horizon and dawn. Our most detailed knowledge of this journey comes from texts like the Amduat, meaning that which is in the underworld, which were carved on the walls of royal tombs during the New Kingdom period. These weren't just stories, they were guides, maps of the afterlife, ritual texts that the deceased king would use to navigate his own journey through death. By following in Ra's footsteps, by knowing the names and nature of each hour, the dead hoped to reach the same rebirth the sun god achieved each morning. The first hour began at sunset, as the boat passed through the Arket, the horizon gate, into the Duat. This was a transitional region, still holding some echo of the world above. The landscape here was described as marshland, filled with reeds and lotus flowers, the waters of Osiris according to some accounts. This was fitting, as Osiris was the god of the dead, the ruler of the underworld, and his domain would feature prominently in several hours of Ra's journey. In this first hour, Ra encountered the souls of the blessed dead who had been waiting for his arrival. They greeted him with joy, for his presence brought light and life even to the realm of death. The texts describe them calling out prayers and offerings, celebrating the sun god's arrival. This was a gentle beginning, a reminder that death need not be all horror and trial. For those who had lived well, who had upheld Ma'at, death brought them into the presence of the gods themselves. The second hour deepened the descent. Here, Ra's boat sailed on what texts describe as the waters of the night, a subterranean Nile that flowed beneath the earthly river. The land around this waterway was agricultural, filled with fields of grain that needed to be tended and harvested. This may seem strange, the presence of agriculture in the land of the dead, but it reflected Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. Paradise wasn't freedom from work. It was the assurance of abundant crops, harvests that never failed, fields that could be plowed and sown and reaped in eternal cycles. The goddess of the second hour, whose name varied in different texts but was associated with protection and guidance, ensured the boat's safe passage. Apep had not yet appeared. These early hours were, in some sense, a period of relative peace, allowing Ra to regain some strength, allowing the crew to prepare for the trials ahead. The third hour brought Ra into the realm of Osiris proper. Here, in the kingdom of the dead god, judgment occurred. The famous scene of the weighing of the heart, where a deceased person's heart was measured against the feather of Ma'at, took place in a region associated with this hour. This was where the dead discovered whether they would be justified, allowed to continue into paradise, or condemned to the second death, total annihilation, their hearts devoured by Ammit the Devourer. Ra's presence during this hour revitalized the justified dead, giving them energy and life even in death. The texts describe how the souls in this region would wake and live fully during the hour Ra passed through them, then return to sleep until his next arrival. This created a curious rhythm to the afterlife, periods of vibrant existence alternating with rest, a cycle within the greater cycle of day and night. The fourth hour introduced increasing difficulty. Here, the river became difficult to navigate, passing through the domain of Sokar, a god associated with death, the earth, and darkness. Sokar appears in texts as either a distinct deity or, in some traditions, as a hidden aspect of Osiris, representing the most mysterious and inaccessible elements of death itself. His domain was described as a place where the river disappeared into ravines, where desert sand concealed the water, where normal navigation became impossible. The texts call this region the land of Sokar, or Rostau, and consistently depict it as the most difficult passage before facing Apep. Now here's where the texts become fascinating and open to interpretation. According to some accounts, particularly in the Amduat, the boat itself had to transform to pass through this waterless region. Scholars interpret the imagery as suggesting the boat became serpent-like, a form that could slither through sand-choked passages where a normal vessel could not sail. This transformation would mirror Ra's own changing nature throughout the journey, adapting to the requirements of each stage. Whether the Egyptians meant this literally or symbolically remains debated, but the imagery is consistent. The goddess of this hour would guide this transformed vessel through Sokar's realm, eventually bringing it back to navigable waters in the fifth hour. What makes Sokar's domain especially significant is this: it represented the point of no return. Once Ra entered this region, there was no going back. The path forward was the only path, even though it led directly toward Apep's lair in the seventh hour. The journey through Sokar was the commitment, the point where retreat became impossible. Forward, through chaos, was the only way to reach rebirth. The fifth hour continued through Sokar's domain, described as the kingdom of the dead in its most absolute sense. Here, in the deepest part of the underworld, existed a balance of opposites that defied normal logic. Water and desert sand mixed in ways that should be impossible. Life and death blurred together in the same space. The sarcophagus of Sokar itself was visible in some depictions, a mysterious object that contained the most hidden aspects of death itself, secrets that the texts suggest even Ra could not fully penetrate or understand. The sixth hour marked a transition. The river reappeared, the boat returned to its proper form, and Ra began to move toward the critical confrontation that awaited in the seventh hour. But before that battle, the sixth hour presented its own challenges and wonders. Here, the souls of those who had been enemies of the gods faced punishment. The texts describe fields of fire, demons who tormented the wicked, regions where those who had violated Ma'at suffered the consequences of their choices. But this was not meaningless cruelty. Egyptian theology held that justice required consequences, that violation of cosmic order couldn't go unanswered. The punishments described weren't eternal in most accounts. Rather, they were purifying, burning away the corruption that had accumulated through unjust actions. The goal was a restoration of balance, not revenge. Then came the seventh hour, and everything changed. This was the hour of Apep's greatest assault, the moment when chaos launched its most determined attack against order, when darkness sought to swallow light forever. The textual descriptions of this hour's geography read like accounts of a nightmare made manifest. Deep waters darker than night itself, sandbanks that were actually the coils of Apep, massive beyond comprehension, wrapped around the path the boat must take. Even the air, the texts insist, became thick and oppressive, making it difficult to breathe, to move, to think clearly. The very atmosphere of the seventh hour was chaos pressing in, trying to smother order. The attack's timing varied in different accounts. Sometimes Apep would emerge suddenly from the depths. Sometimes the serpent's approach was terrifyingly inevitable, visible from the sixth hour, growing larger as Ra's boat sailed inexorably toward it. What remained consistent was the serpent's overwhelming size. Ancient texts struggle to convey its magnitude. 120 cubits in some accounts, 300 in others, while still other scribes simply gave up on measurement and called it fathomless or world encircling. Its scales were harder than stone, its teeth sharper than any blade, and its eyes, those hypnotic serpentine eyes, could freeze even gods in their tracks. Here's where the battle strategy becomes clear and reveals why Set's presence was absolutely essential. Apep's primary weapon wasn't physical strength, though it had that in abundance. The serpent's most dangerous power was its hypnotic gaze. The coffin texts explicitly describe this as a magical attack that could paralyze victims, leaving them helpless as the serpent struck. One by one, the gods aboard the boat would freeze, their movements slowing, then stopping entirely, their minds trapped in a trance induced by pure chaos. Even Isis, with all her magical knowledge, could be affected. Even Mehen, a serpent himself, could fall under Apep's spell. Even the justified dead, all those righteous souls fighting for creation, would fall silent, paralyzed. But not Set. Here's the detail that made Set irreplaceable. He alone remained immune to Apep's hypnotic power. The texts never fully explain why. Some scholars suggest Set's own chaotic nature made him resistant to chaos-inducing magic, that like couldn't affect like in this way. Others propose that Set's sheer willpower, his fierce determination, simply refused to submit even to the ultimate serpent's power. Whatever the reason, when every other defender was frozen, when Ra's boat was surrounded by Apep's coils, when the situation seemed hopeless, Set would still be fighting. His iron spear would still be thrusting into Apep's flesh, drawing the serpent's attention, preventing total disaster. The battle was never easy, never certain. Various texts describe different outcomes of individual knights' confrontations. Based on some accounts, particularly those explaining solar eclipses, scholars interpret certain passages as describing Apep actually swallowing Ra and the entire boat, plunging everything into darkness within darkness, as the texts phrase it. When this happened, the battle would shift from defending the boat to escaping from inside the serpent itself. The gods would have to cut their way out through Apep's flesh, carving an exit wound through which the boat could emerge, Ra wounded but alive, the journey able to continue. And here's where the cosmic and the human realms intersected in the most direct way. On earth above, in temples across Egypt, priests performed the ritual of overthrowing Apep simultaneously with the battle in the Duat. They spoke spells and burned wax effigies of the serpent, quite literally adding their power to the cosmic struggle. This wasn't symbolic or metaphorical. The Egyptians believed that human ritual action genuinely affected divine reality, that priests speaking protective spells made Set's spear strike harder, made Isis's magic bind more tightly, made Apep's scales easier to pierce. When solar eclipses occurred unexpectedly during the day, Egyptians understood it as Apep achieving a rare daylight victory, and the entire country would spring into ritual action, performing the overthrowing ceremonies repeatedly until the sun returned. Their terror was genuine. Their relief when dawn came was profound. They had helped Ra survive. Their actions had mattered. The 8th hour brought relief, at least temporarily. Apep was driven back, wounded but not dead. Never dead, retreating into the depths to heal and wait for the next night's battle. The boat could continue, though Ra's form was even more diminished now, the toll of his journey and the battle evident in his weakened state. This hour and those that followed, the 9th, 10th, and 11th, involved the process of healing and preparation for rebirth. Ra passed through regions where deities worked to restore him, to prepare him for the transformation that would occur in the final hour. These regions were described as workshops of regeneration, places where the dead sun god's body was symbolically reassembled, where his power was gradually restored. In the 9th hour, Ra encountered more enemies, hostile forces that sought to prevent his passage, even though the greatest threat had been faced and overcome. But these enemies were lesser, and the boat's defenders, victorious over Apep, dealt with them efficiently. The 10th hour brought Ra into contact with the gates that would open to the east, the portals through which rebirth would occur. The 11th hour was described as a time of anticipation and preparation. The darkness began to thin, not with light yet, but with the promise of light. The gods aboard the boat began to prepare for the transformation, for the moment when the dying Ra would become the reborn Khepri, the scarab beetle who rolled the sun into the eastern sky. And then came the 12th hour, the hour of rebirth itself. Here, in the deepest mystery of the Egyptian cosmos, death transformed into life. Ra entered the body of a divine serpent, sometimes called the life of the gods, and passed through it to emerge renewed. This serpent wasn't hostile like Apep. It represented the life force itself, the power of regeneration and rebirth that existed even within the realm of death. As Ra emerged from the serpent, he transformed again. No longer the ram-headed Auf, the corpse god, he became Khepri, the scarab-headed god of the rising sun, of beginnings, of morning. The texts describe this moment in terms of joy and triumph. The gods aboard the boat celebrating, the blessed dead singing praises, the very Duat itself seeming to lighten as if in relief. The boat would then ascend from the underworld, passing back through the horizon gate, but now in the east rather than the west. The morning Barque, the manjet, would replace the night Barque, the mesectet. The crew might change, new gods taking their positions for the daytime journey. And Ra, renewed and powerful once more, would begin his voyage across the sky, bringing light and warmth to Egypt and the world. But even as he began this new journey, as dawn broke and darkness fled, everyone understood that it was temporary. In 12 hours, the sun would set again. The transformation would reverse. Ra would once more become the dying god, would once more descend into the Duat, would once more face Apep in the 7th hour of night. The cycle was eternal, endless, playing out every night from creation until the end of time. This was the journey. These were the 12 hours. This was the landscape through which Ra must travel, the challenges he must overcome, the death he must die, and the rebirth he must achieve, night after night, forever. The serpent of eternal chaos. To understand the nightly battle between Ra and Apep, we must understand Apep itself, the chaos serpent, the embodiment of destruction, the enemy of light and order, and everything the ancient Egyptians held sacred. This was not simply a large snake. This was not a beast to be killed and forgotten. Apep was a fundamental force of the universe, older than Ra, present before creation, eternal and unkillable, the living manifestation of everything that threatened Ma'at. The origins of Apep are deliberately obscure in most sources, and for good reason. The answer to where this ultimate evil came from reveals something deeply uncomfortable about the nature of creation itself. In the earliest traditions, Apep had simply always existed in the waters of Nun, the primordial chaos that existed before Ra brought order and light into being. Apep was what remained of that original chaos, what had not been transformed into ordered creation, what refused to be ordered. It represented the universe's dark truth, that creation itself could be undone, that order could collapse back into chaos, that light could be swallowed by darkness and never return. But here's the reveal that changes everything, that makes Apep's existence truly horrifying rather than simply threatening. Some traditions claimed that Apep was born from Ra himself, specifically from Ra's umbilical cord at the moment of the sun god's birth. Let that sink in for a moment. The greatest enemy of order, the ultimate threat to all existence, emerged directly from the Creator himself at the moment of creation. Apep wasn't some external force that invaded the cosmos from outside. It came from within creation, from within the very God who brought light and order into being. The destroyer was inseparable from the Creator. Chaos wasn't an intruder. It was built into the system from the very first moment. A much later tradition, dating from after Greek and Roman influence, when Egyptian priests were trying to make sense of their myths in conversation with foreign philosophies, claimed that the goddess Neith spat Apep out from the primeval waters, rejecting it as unclean and chaos-inducing. But notice, even in this version, the serpent came from the Creator's own substance, her own saliva. The materials of chaos and the materials of order were the same materials, just differently intended, differently shaped. But these later attempts to domesticate Apep's origin shouldn't obscure the earlier and more primal understanding. Apep was not created by the gods. It predated them, or at least existed alongside them from the beginning. It was the universe's capacity for self-destruction the ever-present possibility of entropy and dissolution, given serpentine form and terrible will. The descriptions of Apep's physical form varied, but all emphasized its enormity. 16 yards in some texts, 300 cubits in others. Some simply gave up and said it was as long as the world itself. Its body was so massive that when coiled, its loops created what appeared to be mountains or sandbanks. Its scales were described as being hard as flint, impervious to normal weapons. Its head alone was said to be large enough to swallow the solar Barque whole. But Apep's most dangerous attribute wasn't its size. It was its hypnotic gaze. The serpent could use its eyes to paralyze victims, to induce a trance that left even gods helpless. This wasn't simple fear response. The texts describe it as a magical attack-actual attack, chaos assaulting the ordered mind, dissolving the victim's sense of self and purpose, leaving them frozen and unable to resist as the serpent struck. Apep could also speak, and its voice was described as terrible, a roar that made the underworld rumble, that caused earthquakes in the world above when the battle was particularly fierce. Some accounts credit the origin of thunderstorms to Apep's conflicts with Set. When the Chaos Serpent and the Chaos God clashed, the noise and violence of their struggle manifested in the world of the living as thunder and lightning, storms that terrified and sometimes destroyed. The serpent's methods of attack varied. Sometimes it would attempt to swallow Ra and the boat whole, using its massive jaws and throat to engulf the entire vessel. Sometimes it would wrap its coils around the boat, attempting to stop its forward progress, to trap it in the 7th hour forever, preventing Ra from reaching the rebirth that awaited in the 12th hour. Sometimes it would try to flood the boat with the waters of the underworld, drowning the defenders, contaminating the vessel with chaos. Some texts credit Apep with the ability to create illusions, to confuse the boat's navigation, to make false paths appear real while hiding the true way forward. This wasn't just physical threat, it was epistemological attack, assault on the ability to know truth, to distinguish reality from deception. In a universe where knowing something's true name gave you power over it, where words and knowledge were forms of magic, Apep's ability to induce confusion and false perception was terrifyingly dangerous. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Apep was its unkillability. No matter how many times Set pierced it with his spear, no matter how thoroughly it was defeated, Apep would always return. The texts are clear on this point. Apep could be wounded, could be driven back, could be prevented from achieving its goals, but it could not be destroyed. It would heal, would wait, would return the next night to renew the assault. This wasn't a flaw in the god's power. It was a fundamental truth about the nature of chaos and order. As long as creation existed, the possibility of its destruction existed. You couldn't eliminate that possibility without eliminating creation itself. The best that could be hoped for was eternal vigilance, constant defense, the daily victory that would have to be won again the next day and the day after that, forever. The symbolic meaning of Apep was multi-layered and profound. On the most literal level, the serpent represented the danger of darkness, the very real fear that the sun might not rise, that the cycles of nature might break down, that the order which sustained life might collapse. On a deeper level, Apep represented isfet, the Egyptian concept of chaos, lies, violence, and injustice. It was everything opposed to Ma'at, everything that threatened cosmic and social balance. In this understanding, every time someone told a lie, committed an act of violence, violated justice, they were feeding Apep, strengthening chaos. And conversely, every act of truth, justice, and balance weakened the serpent, made Ra's nightly victory a little easier. This created a profound sense of moral responsibility. The choices of individual humans had cosmic significance. Your actions mattered not just for your own judgment after death, but for the very stability of creation. Apep also represented the unknown, the incomprehensible, that which resisted understanding and assimilation into ordered thought. The Egyptians, despite their comfort with paradox and multiplicity, needed order. Their civilization depended on the regular flooding of the Nile, on the predictable return of seasons, on the ability to plan and build and trust that tomorrow would come. Apep was the fear that tomorrow might not come, that the patterns they depended on might simply stop. Interestingly, Apep was never worshipped. There were no temples to the chaos serpent, no priests who served it, no festivals in its honor. It existed in Egyptian thought entirely as an enemy, as something to be opposed and overcome. This sets it apart from other dangerous deities like Set, who, despite their association with chaos and violence, still received worship and had devoted followers. Apep was pure antagonist, existing in the myths solely to be fought against. The serpent's titles reflected this role. It was called the enemy of Ra, Lord of Chaos, evil dragon, serpent from the Nile, he who was spat out, world encircler. Each name emphasized a different aspect of its threat, but all agreed on its fundamental nature as opposition, as the enemy that could never become an ally, the force that could never be reasoned with or appeased. This made Apep terrifying in a way that even other dangerous entities in Egyptian mythology were not. Set could be violent and chaotic, but he could also be heroic. He could choose to defend Ra, to use his chaos-aligned powers for ordered purposes. Ammit devoured the hearts of the unjust, but this was a form of justice, however harsh. Even the demons and monsters of the Duat served purposes, guarding gates, punishing the wicked, maintaining the structure of the underworld. But Apep served no purpose except destruction. It wanted nothing except to unmake creation, to return everything to the primordial chaos. There was no negotiating with such an entity, no appeasing it, no converting it to service of Ma'at. There was only eternal resistance, endless fighting, the nightly battle that could be won but never finally concluded. And yet, paradoxically, Apep's existence was necessary. Without chaos to oppose, order had no meaning. Without darkness, light couldn't be defined. Without the constant threat of destruction, the preservation of creation wouldn't be an act of courage and will, but simply the default state. Apep made Ra's journey heroic. The serpent's attacks gave meaning to the god's defense, made their victory something to celebrate rather than simply expect. This was the enemy Ra faced, the ultimate adversary, the living embodiment of the universe's capacity for dissolution. And the battle between them was the cosmic struggle upon which all else depended, playing out in the 7th hour of every night, forever. The nightly battle, confrontation in the 7th hour. The 7th hour of Ra's journey through the Duat was the hinge upon which everything turned. If the sun god could survive Apep's assault during this hour, he would reach rebirth in the 12th hour, dawn would come, and the world would continue for another day. If Apep succeeded in preventing the boat's passage, if the serpent managed to swallow Ra and keep him swallowed, then creation itself would begin to unravel. Darkness would become permanent. Chaos would overcome order. Ma'at would shatter. As Ra's boat approached the 7th hour, the change in the Duat's atmosphere would be palpable according to the texts. The already dim light that sometimes illuminated the underworld would fade further. The waters would grow unnaturally still, or unnaturally turbulent depending on the account. A sense of oppression would settle over the boat, making it difficult to breathe, to think clearly, to maintain focus. This was Apep's influence beginning to make itself felt. Chaos starting to seep into the ordered space the boat represented. The crew would take their positions, having fought this battle countless times before, but knowing that each iteration carried the same mortal stakes. Set would move to the prow, his iron spear ready, his stance braced for impact. The choice of iron for Set's spear was significant. Iron was rare in ancient Egypt, mostly obtained from meteorites, and it was associated with the bones of Set and with divine power. An iron spear could pierce what bronze or stone could not, could wound even a creature as massive and chaos-touched as Apep. Isis would begin her protective incantations, layering magical defenses around Ra's shrine, creating barriers of power that Apep would have to break through before reaching the vulnerable sun god. Mehen would coil tighter, his serpentine body forming concentric rings of protection. The justified dead would add their voices to the chanting, creating a chorus of protective sound that pushed back against the oppressive silence of the deep Duat. The attack would come from the depths, Apep rising from waters so dark they seemed solid, emerging in coils that seemed endless. The texts often describe the serpent as appearing in sections, loop after loop of massive scaled body breaking the surface, each coil alone as large as a hill, all of them parts of the same impossible creature. The sight alone was enough to induce terror, and the serpent knew it, using fear as a weapon before physical combat even began. Apep's first tactic was often to create what the texts called sandbanks, though these were not made of sand, but of the serpent's own coils. It would position its massive body beneath and around the boat, creating barriers that blocked the path forward. The boat would slow, then stop entirely if the serpent succeeded, trapped among coils that constantly tightened, preventing any progress through the hour. When this happened, Set would strike, his spear piercing the serpent's flesh, finding the places where the scales were thinnest, where wounds could actually be inflicted. The text describes Set as knowing Apep intimately, understanding its form and weaknesses after countless battles. He knew where to strike for maximum effect, knew how to keep the serpent's attention focused on him rather than on Ra, knew how to turn the chaos of battle into an advantage through sheer martial skill. But even as Set fought, Apep would deploy its gaze attack. The serpent's eyes, described in some texts as glowing with a sickly light, would fix on the gods aboard the boat. One by one they would freeze, their movements slowing, then stopping, their minds trapped in a hypnotic trance induced by chaos magic. Even the justified dead were not immune, falling silent as the hypnosis took hold. Only Set remained resistant, a fact explained in various ways by different texts. Some credit his strength of will, his utter refusal to submit even to chaos itself. Others suggest that Set's own chaotic nature made him immune to Apep's chaos-inducing powers, that like could not affect like in this way. A few texts hint that Set had learned techniques of mental defense over the countless battles, that he had developed resistance through exposure and determination. With the other defenders temporarily disabled, Set would fight alone, his spear thrusting and slashing, keeping Apep at bay through sheer ferocity. The contest would seem almost evenly matched. God of chaos against embodiment of chaos. Iron spear against scales harder than stone, will against hunger, preservation against destruction. The boat would rock violently as Apep's coils thrashed, as Set's attacks drew blood and pain from the serpent, as the waters of the Duat churned with the violence of their struggle. Meanwhile, Isis would be working her own magic, fighting to break the hypnotic spell affecting the other gods. She knew the true names of Apep's powers, understood the nature of the trance it induced. Her spells of counterminding, of clarity and wakefulness and ordered thought, would gradually chip away at the hypnosis. One by one, the gods would begin to stir, consciousness returning, the ability to move and fight flowing back into frozen limbs. As the defenders awoke, the battle would shift decisively. Apep, already wounded by Set's relentless assault, now faced multiple attackers. The spears and weapons of the other gods would join the fight. The justified dead would resume their protective chanting, their voices creating a sound barrier that pushed back against Apep's roar. Isis's offensive magic would strike at the serpent, spells of binding and banishment and burning that attacked chaos with order, darkness with light. Some accounts describe how Apep, in desperation, would attempt to swallow Ra despite the defenders' efforts. The serpent's jaws would open impossibly wide, and it would lunge at the boat, attempting to engulf it entirely. Sometimes, horrifyingly, it would succeed. The boat, Ra, the defending gods, all would be swallowed, finding themselves inside the serpent, in darkness within darkness, in chaos that tried to digest and destroy them. But even this wasn't final defeat. The texts describe how Set, even inside Apep's body, would continue fighting, his spear carving a path through the serpent's flesh from the inside. Sometimes it was Ra himself who would transform, taking a more active role, becoming a cat or another form capable of slicing through Apep with claws or teeth. The gods would literally cut their way out, emerging from a gaping wound in the serpent's side, the boat following, soaked in the serpent's blood, but intact. Ra shaken, but alive. The battle would continue until Apep was too wounded to maintain the fight, until the serpent's coils loosened, until it retreated back into the depths to heal. The boat would be able to continue, passing through what remained of the 7th hour, emerging into the 8th hour battered but victorious. Ra, though even more weakened by the ordeal, would still live, would still journey toward the rebirth that awaited in the 12th hour. On earth above, as dawn approached and the 7th hour of night was ending, priests in temples across Egypt would be performing the climactic parts of their own rituals. Having spent the night speaking spells from the Book of Overthrowing Apep, having made and destroyed wax effigies of the serpent, they would conclude their ceremony with fire, burning the last representations of Apep as the first light touched the eastern horizon, symbolically adding their power to the gods' victory in the underworld. The parallel rituals, human and divine, reflected Egyptian understanding of the interconnection between all levels of reality. What happened in the Duat affected the world of the living. What humans did affected the realm of the gods. When priests fought against Apep through ritual, they weren't playing pretend. They were genuinely contributing to the cosmic struggle, adding their voices and power to the defense of Ma'at, making it marginally easier for Ra and his defenders to achieve victory. The 7th hour's battle was never exactly the same, though it followed consistent patterns. Sometimes Apep would use new tactics, new approaches, forcing the defenders to adapt. Sometimes Set would be wounded, requiring other gods to take on more of the fighting. Sometimes the hypnosis would be harder to break, sometimes easier. The texts describe variation within consistency, suggesting that the Egyptians understood their myths as living things, not fixed scripts, but ongoing dramas that played out with nuance and variation. What never changed was the necessity of the battle, the stakes involved, and the outcome. Apep had to attack, because that was its nature, its purpose, its being. Ra had to defend, because creation depended on it. The gods had to fight, because they were the guardians of order. And victory, though hard won and requiring enormous effort and sacrifice, had to be achieved. Because if it wasn't, if Apep won even once, there would be no recovery, no second chance. That single defeat would be final, would be the end of everything. This created an interesting theological tension. The battle's outcome was foretold, was necessary, was in some sense predetermined. Ra would survive. Dawn would come. The cycle would continue. But the battle was also genuinely contested, genuinely difficult, genuinely uncertain in the moment. Both things were true simultaneously. The Egyptians were comfortable with this paradox in a way that might seem strange to modern Western thought. Fate was real, but so was struggle. The outcome was assured, but so was the necessity of fighting for it. This perhaps explains why Apep, despite never succeeding, remained such a vital part of Egyptian mythology. The serpent's ultimate defeat didn't make its battles meaningless. Rather, the nightly confrontation gave meaning and weight to concepts like order, justice, and balance. These weren't just abstract ideals. They were things worth fighting for, things that required eternal vigilance, things that the gods themselves struggled to maintain against overwhelming opposition. And every morning, when the sun rose in the east, when light returned to banish darkness, when warmth spread across the land, Egyptians would know that in the depths of night, in the seventh hour of the underworld, Ra and his defenders had once again prevailed. Another day had been won. Creation had survived. The battle would have to be fought again when darkness returned. But for now, for these 12 hours of daylight, there was light, life, and hope. Ma'at and cosmic order. To fully understand the significance of Ra's nightly battle against Apep, we must explore the concept that undergirded all of Egyptian theology, law, and social organization. Ma'at. This word, this idea, this goddess, was the foundation upon which Egyptian civilization built itself, the principle that made sense of the universe and humanity's place within it. Ma'at is often translated as truth, justice, balance, order, harmony, or morality. But none of these English words fully capture what Ma'at meant to the ancient Egyptians. It was all of these things simultaneously, and something more, something that connected cosmic order with human behavior, that linked the motions of the stars with the actions of individuals, that made personal morality a matter of universal significance. The concept of Ma'at emerged early in Egyptian history, appearing in the pyramid texts from the Old Kingdom more than 4,300 years ago. But its roots surely went deeper, predating the written word, existing as an oral tradition and lived philosophy before it was ever carved in stone. From the beginning, Ma'at was understood as the order that Ra had established at creation, replacing the chaos of Nun with structure, light, law, and purpose. Ma'at was personified as a goddess, typically depicted as a woman wearing an ostrich feather on her head, or sometimes simply represented by the feather alone. This feather would become one of the most important symbols in all of Egyptian iconography, appearing in the judgment scene where the heart of the deceased was weighed against it. If your heart was lighter than the feather, if your life had been lived in accordance with Ma'at, you would pass into paradise. If your heart was heavier, weighed down by lies, injustice, and chaos, Ammit the Devourer would consume it, and you would face the second death, complete annihilation. But Ma'at was more than just the standard for judgment in the afterlife. It was the principle that governed everything. The regular rising and setting of the sun was Ma'at. The annual flooding of the Nile that brought fertility to Egypt's fields was Ma'at. The orderly progression of the seasons, the predictable movements of the stars, the hierarchical structure of society, all were expressions of Ma'at. When these things functioned properly, when order was maintained, Egyptians knew that Ma'at prevailed. The opposite of Ma'at was isfet, a word meaning chaos, disorder, lies, violence, and injustice. Isfet was what existed before creation. It was what threatened to return if Ma'at failed. and it was what Apep embodied in its purest, most concentrated form. The nightly battle between Ra and Apep was fundamentally a battle between Maat and Isfet, between the order that sustained creation and the chaos that sought to destroy it. This understanding made Ra's journey essential in a way that went beyond just explaining why the sun rose each day. Yes, the myth provided a narrative for the daily solar cycle, but it also demonstrated that order was not automatic, not self-sustaining. Ma'at required constant effort, constant defense, constant renewal. Even the gods couldn't simply establish order once and then relax. They had to fight for it, night after night, maintaining it through will and effort and sacrifice. For human beings, this created both a cosmic role and a moral imperative. Every person's actions either supported Ma'at or supported Isfet. There was no neutral ground. When you spoke truth, when you dealt justly with others, when you maintained balance in your relationships and responsibilities, you were strengthening Ma'at, making Ra's nightly victory a little easier, contributing to the stability of creation itself. Conversely, when you lied, when you acted unjustly, when you created disorder through violence or corruption or selfishness, you were feeding Isfet, strengthening chaos, making Apep's task easier. Your individual choices mattered not just for your own judgment after death, but for the fate of the universe. This is a staggering concept when you pause to consider it. The actions of a single person, even the humblest peasant, had cosmic significance. But here's the twist that makes this theology revolutionary, that sets Egyptian thought apart from many other ancient religious systems. The relationship went both ways. The Egyptians didn't just believe that humans needed the gods to survive. They believed the gods needed humans. Ra's victory over Apep wasn't automatic. It required human ritual support, human prayers, human magical intervention. The texts are explicit about this. Without the daily rituals performed in temples, without the protective spells spoken by priests, without the offerings and the ceremonies and the acts of devotion, Ra's boat might fail to pass through the seventh hour. The sun might not rise. The gods were powerful, yes, but they weren't omnipotent. They could be wounded, could be weakened, could potentially be defeated. And humanity's active participation was what tipped the balance, what made victory possible night after night. This belief profoundly shaped Egyptian society. Pharaohs were understood to rule not by might alone, but by their ability to uphold Ma'at. Each pharaoh, at his coronation, would present offerings of Ma'at to the gods, symbolized by small statues of the goddess. This wasn't mere ritual. It was a promise, a declaration that his reign would be conducted according to the principles of truth, justice, and order. A pharaoh who failed to uphold Ma'at, who allowed injustice to flourish, who let chaos gain ground, was not just a bad ruler. He was a cosmic failure, threatening the stability of creation itself. The legal system was built on Ma'at. Judges, beginning in the 5th dynasty, were called priests of Ma'at and wore images of the goddess as signs of their authority. They were expected to render judgments that upheld balance and justice, to see through lies to the truth, to act as Ma'at's representatives on earth. Punishments were designed not merely to harm the guilty, but to restore balance, to correct the disorder that crime had introduced into society. Even daily life was structured around Ma'at. The way homes were built, the way fields were laid out, the way temples were oriented, all reflected principles of balance and order. Egyptian art, with its characteristic symmetry and careful proportions, wasn't just aesthetic choice. It was an expression of Ma'at, order made visible, balance rendered in stone and paint. The annual flooding of the Nile, Egypt's most important natural event, was understood as Ma'at in action. The river's regular rise and fall, bringing fertile silt to the fields, was the physical manifestation of cosmic order functioning properly. Years when the flood came too high or too low, bringing disaster instead of fertility, were years when isfet had gained ground, when chaos had temporarily disrupted the pattern. These were times for increased ritual attention, more offerings to the gods, renewed commitment to living according to Ma'at's principles. Ma'at also represented cooperation and reciprocity. Egyptian society required massive cooperative efforts, building pyramids and temples, maintaining irrigation systems, coordinating the planting and harvesting of crops across the entire Nile Valley. All of these demanded that people work together, trust each other, fulfill their obligations to one another. Ma'at was the principle that made such cooperation possible, the shared commitment to truth and justice that allowed society to function. The famous negative confessions, which a deceased person would recite during judgment, list 42 specific things the person claimed not to have done. These confessions are revealing, showing what Egyptians considered violations of Ma'at. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not caused pain. But also, I have not been angry without cause. I have not copulated improperly. I have not made anyone cry. I have not been envious. This last category reveals how broadly Ma'at extended. It wasn't just about major crimes, but about the quality of one's interactions, the impact of one's emotional state on others, the maintenance of harmony in daily relationships. Ma'at governed everything from murder to minor interpersonal friction, all of it mattering, all of it either contributing to order or to chaos. The goddess Ma'at was said to ride at the prow of Ra's boat during his daytime journey across the sky, guiding the sun god, ensuring his path was straight and true. At night, during the journey through the Duat, her presence became even more critical. The boat itself represented Ma'at, ordered space moving through chaotic space, maintaining its integrity through the application of divine law and power. Every successful journey Ra completed, every arrival at the eastern horizon, every sunrise, was proof that Ma'at prevailed over isfet, that order remained stronger than chaos. This created an interesting relationship between humanity and divinity. The gods maintained Ma'at on the cosmic level, fighting Apep, regulating the heavens, controlling the Nile. Humans maintained Ma'at on the earthly level, speaking truth, doing justice, maintaining order in their relationships and communities. These weren't separate tasks. They were interconnected parts of the same universal project, the preservation of creation against the ever-present threat of dissolution. When Egyptians performed rituals to aid Ra against Apep, they were participating directly in the cosmic struggle. When they lived according to Ma'at's principles, they were contributing to the same cause. When the pharaoh ruled justly, when priests performed their duties correctly, when judges rendered fair verdicts, when individuals spoke truth and acted with integrity, all of it strengthened the fabric of reality, made it harder for chaos to gain ground, supported the gods in their eternal defense of creation. This is why Ra's nightly journey mattered so much, why it occupied such central space in Egyptian religious thought. It wasn't just an explanation for the sun's movements, it was a cosmological statement about the nature of reality, about the relationship between order and chaos, about the necessity of constant vigilance and effort to maintain what had been achieved. It said that the universe tended not toward order, but toward entropy, toward dissolution, toward the victory of isfet unless Ma'at was actively defended. And it said that this defense was not the god's responsibility alone. Every being had a role to play. Every action mattered. Every choice between truth and lies, Justice and injustice, order and chaos, contributed to the outcome of the eternal battle playing out in the depths of night, in the 7th hour of the Duat, where Apep coiled and struck and was defeated night after night, forever, but only through constant effort, divine and human together. Mortal participation, rituals and magic. The ancient Egyptians did not view themselves as passive spectators to Ra's nightly battle. They believed they had a role to play, a responsibility to contribute to the sun god's defense against Apep. This belief manifested in elaborate rituals, protective spells, and daily practices designed to weaken the chaos serpent and strengthen Ra, creating a profound connection between the world of the living and the cosmic drama playing out in the Duat. The most important ritual text guiding this mortal participation was known as the Book of Overthrowing Apep, also called the Book of Apophis or the Book of the Enemy of Ra. Dating primarily to the New Kingdom period, but drawing on older oral traditions, this collection of spells and instructions provided detailed guidance on how to ritually combat the chaos serpent. The best preserved example of these texts appears on the Bremner Rind papyrus, now housed in the British Museum, a document that reveals the sophistication and seriousness with which Egyptians approached this magical warfare. The Book of Overthrowing Apep wasn't just a collection of prayers, it was a ritual manual, a guide to sympathetic magic that assumed a fundamental interconnection between physical objects, spoken words, and cosmic forces. The text began with creation mythology, establishing Ra's authority and power, reminding the practitioner of the sun, God's role as creator and sustainer of existence. Then it listed the evil names of Apep, each name representing a different aspect of the serpent's destructive nature, each one that needed to be known and countered. The core of the ritual involved creating physical representations of Apep and then destroying them in specific, carefully detailed ways. Priests would fashion effigies of the serpent from wax, writing Apep's name on them in green ink. Green was the color of life and growing things in Egypt. But in this context, it may have been chosen to represent the corruption of life, the perversion of fertility into chaos. The name written on the effigy was crucial. In Egyptian magical thought, knowing and speaking a being's true name gave you power over it. By inscribing Apep's name on the effigy, the priest established a sympathetic connection between the wax figure and the actual serpent in the Duat. Once created, the effigy would undergo a series of degradations. The texts are explicit and detailed in their instructions. The priests would spit upon the wax serpent, an act of contempt and defilement. They would trample it with their left feet, the left side being associated with uncleanliness and the powers that needed to be kept under control. They would slash it with knives, symbolically wounding Apep, even as Set was wounding the serpent with his spear in the Duat. They would bind it with ropes, restraining chaos, preventing movement. Finally, they would burn the effigy. Fire was purifying, transformative, the element most associated with the sun god himself. As the wax melted and burned, priests would recite spells designed to transfer that destruction to Apep itself, to weaken the chaos serpent, to make its defeat in the nightly battle easier for Ra and his defenders. Some rituals specified that the ashes should be mixed with filth or urine and buried, ensuring the complete debasement of the serpent's representation. These rituals weren't performed once and forgotten. They were part of daily temple liturgy, conducted every day, sometimes multiple times per day, ensuring constant pressure against Apep, constant support for Ra. The most elaborate performances occurred during special festivals and during times of celestial crisis, when the sun's behavior seemed abnormal or threatening. Solar eclipses were particular times of terror and intensified ritual activity. When the sun disappeared during the day, Egyptians understood it as Apep, achieving a temporary victory. Swallowing Ra even during daylight hours, the entire country would spring into ritual action. Temples would perform the overthrowing Apep ceremonies repeatedly. Individuals would make offerings and speak protective spells. Everyone, from pharaoh to peasant, would participate in whatever way their knowledge and resources allowed, all contributing to the cosmic struggle to free Ra from the serpent's jaws and restore the sun. Cloudy days or unusually dark nights would trigger similar concerns and responses. If the sun seemed dim, if storms blocked its light, this suggested Apep was gaining strength, that chaos was pushing back harder than usual against order. Increased ritual attention was the response. More spells, more offerings, more magical combat against the serpent. Beyond the formal temple rituals, individuals had their own practices for participating in Ra's defense. The Book of the Dead, the collection of spells designed to help the deceased navigate the afterlife, included spells specifically dealing with Apep. These weren't just for use after death. Living Egyptians would learn and recite these spells as protective magic, as contributions to the ongoing battle. Some households would create their own small effigies of Apep to destroy, performing simplified versions of the temple rituals in their own homes. Amulets bearing protective symbols, particularly the Eye of Horus and the Eye of Ra, were worn constantly to ward off the influence of chaos. These weren't just decorative jewelry. They were believed to carry real protective power, miniature shields against isfet in all its forms. The morning rituals performed in Egyptian temples tied directly to Ra's victory over Apep. The first ceremony of each day was called Lighting the Fire, a ritual that reenacted the first sunrise, the moment when Ra first brought light into existence. Priests would kindle a flame just before dawn, speaking spells that called upon the sun to rise again, asserting order's victory over the night's darkness. This wasn't merely symbolic. Egyptians believed the ritual actually helped Ra complete his journey, gave him energy for the final push through the 12th hour, and the transformative rebirth as Khepri. The second morning ritual was called Drawing the Bolt, the ceremonial opening of the temple's inner sanctum where the god's statue resided. This act symbolized awakening the god after the night's trials, rousing divine power to active defense of creation. Both rituals acknowledged that the gods needed mortal support, that the relationship between humanity and divinity was reciprocal, collaborative. This understanding fostered a profound sense of participation in cosmic events. When you performed your small ritual at home, when the priests conducted their elaborate ceremonies in the temples, when the pharaoh made his offerings to Ma'at, you weren't just going through the motions of religious observance. You were genuinely contributing to the most important struggle in existence, the defense of creation itself against the forces of chaos. This created a remarkable sense of cosmic democracy, if you will. Yes, Egyptian society was rigidly hierarchical, with pharaohs and priests occupying positions of immense power and privilege. But in the battle against Apep, everyone had a role. The humblest farmer speaking a protective spell contributed just as genuinely as the high priest conducting elaborate temple ceremonies. Everyone's effort mattered because the enemy was so powerful, the stakes were so high, that every bit of support for Ra, every act that strengthened Ma'at and weakened Isfet, made a difference. The rituals also served psychological and social functions. They gave people a sense of control in a universe that often seemed uncontrollable. Natural disasters, diseases, the inevitable approach of death, these were frightening realities that Egyptian magic couldn't actually prevent. But by participating in the rituals against Apep, by contributing to Ra's defense, Egyptians could feel they were doing something, were actively working to maintain order and protect what they valued. Socially, the shared rituals created community. Everyone participated in the same cosmic drama, spoke the same spells, performed the same symbolic actions. This created bonds between people, a sense of common purpose and shared struggle. Whether you were a wealthy temple priest or a poor fisherman, you both participated in defending Ra, both contributed to maintaining Myat, both mattered in the eternal battle. The sophistication of Egyptian ritual magic shouldn't be underestimated. These weren't superstitious peasants blindly performing meaningless ceremonies. The priests who developed and refined these rituals were the intellectuals of their society, deeply learned in theology, astronomy, mathematics, and what we might call proto-science. They understood the universe in terms different from ours, but their understanding was coherent, systematic, and sophisticated within its own framework. The principle of sympathetic magic, of connection between representation and represented, of the power of names and words, makes sense within a worldview where reality is fundamentally linguistic and relational. If the universe was spoken into being, if knowing something's true name grants power over it, if words themselves carry creative and destructive force, then the rituals of the Book of Overthrowing Apep are not irrational. They are the logical application of magical principles to a cosmic problem. Whether these rituals actually affected events in the Duat, we cannot say, but they undeniably affected the people who performed them, creating meaning, providing structure, fostering community, and giving individuals a sense of participation in something larger and more significant than their individual lives. They connected the daily existence of ordinary Egyptians to the grandest cosmic drama, the eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and darkness, creation and dissolution. And every morning, when the sun rose in the east, when Ra emerged victorious from the Duat, when light returned to banish darkness, Egyptians could know with certainty that their rituals had helped, that their spells had contributed, that their participation in the cosmic drama had mattered. And they would prepare to do it all again, night after night, forever, because eternal vigilance was the price of existence, and every being, mortal and divine, had to pay it. Rebirth and renewal, the dawn. After the battle, in the 7th hour, after Apep was wounded and driven back, Ra's journey continued through the remaining hours of night, toward the moment of transformation that would make possible the miracle of sunrise. The 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th hours each had their own geography and challenges, but these were lesser obstacles, the difficult part having been overcome with Apep's defeat. Now the journey became one of healing, restoration, and preparation for the most significant transformation in Egyptian cosmology. The 12th hour, the final hour of night, represented the ultimate mystery and the ultimate promise. Here, in the deepest secret place of the Duat, death would become life. The dying sun god, Ra in his age-weakened form of Auf, would transform into Khepri, the scarab-headed god of the rising sun, of dawn, of new beginnings. This wasn't resurrection in the sense we might understand it. It was something more fundamental. Rebirth, transformation, the eternal cycle made manifest. The mechanics of this transformation, as described in texts like the Amduat, were both literal and deeply symbolic. Ra would enter into the body of a divine serpent, sometimes called the life of the gods or the entrant. This serpent wasn't hostile like Apep. It represented life force itself, the regenerative power that existed even in the realm of death, the capacity of existence to renew itself. The journey through this serpent's body was described as a passage through stages of dissolution and reconstitution. Ra would be broken down, his form dissolving, his power dispersing, his identity fragmenting. This was death in its most complete sense, not just the cessation of life, but the disintegration of being itself. The Egyptians didn't shy away from the reality of death's destructiveness. Their texts confronted it directly, acknowledged that death was annihilation, was ending, was loss. But then came the reversal, the miracle that made all of Egyptian theology possible. From the dissolution came reconstitution. Ra's power, scattered through the serpent, would begin to coalesce again. His form would emerge renewed. His identity would re-establish itself, not as a continuation of what had been, but as something new, maintaining continuity with the past, but existing in a fundamentally new way. As Ra emerged from the life of the god's serpent, his transformation into Khepri would complete. The scarab beetle. Khepri was associated with the rising sun because Egyptians had observed scarab beetles rolling balls of dung across the sand, and they imagined the sun god rolling the solar disk through the sky in similar fashion. More deeply, scarabs laid their eggs in these dung balls, and young beetles would later emerge seemingly spontaneously from the balls. This made the scarab a perfect symbol of self-generation, of life emerging from apparent lifelessness. Khepri was youth, vigor, the morning sun climbing toward its zenith. Where Alf had been old and tired, bent by the weight of existence, Khepri was fresh and powerful, renewed energy sufficient to journey across the entire sky. The transformation from Alf to Khepri, from aged dying god to youthful rising god, encapsulated the Central Egyptian understanding of time as cyclical, of death as leading to rebirth, of darkness as necessary precursor to light. The texts describe the gods aboard the boat celebrating this moment with songs and praises. The justified dead would join the celebration, their voices rising in joy and relief. The very Duat itself seemed to lighten, the oppressive darkness of the deeper hours giving way to a kind of pre-dawn twilight. Gates would open before the boat, gates that had been closed during the night's journey, allowing the boat to ascend from the underworld. The geography of this ascent varied in different accounts. Sometimes it was described as a river flowing upward, defying normal water's tendency to flow down. Sometimes it was a stairway or ramp, the boat being pulled or carried up toward the surface. Sometimes the boundary between Duat and the world above simply dissolved, the boat passing through as if through a membrane that separated death from life, darkness from light. What remained consistent was the direction, east. The boat would emerge at the eastern horizon, the same horizon that every Egyptian could see from wherever they lived, the place where the sun appeared each morning. This made the myth immediately, daily visible. Every sunrise was proof that Ra had succeeded, that Apep had been defeated, that rebirth was possible. As the boat crossed the threshold from underworld to sky, the transformation of vessel would occur. The Mezektet, the evening boat, would become the Manjet, the morning boat. The crew might change, new gods taking up positions for the daytime journey. And Ra, now fully Khepri, now the rising sun, would begin his daily voyage across the sky, bringing light and warmth to Egypt and the world. The first light of dawn was considered the most sacred moment of the day. It was when Ra was most vulnerable, newly reborn, not yet at full strength. But it was also when he was most miraculous, proof of the triumph of Ma'at over Isfet, of order over chaos, of light over darkness. Temple rituals timed their climactic moments to coincide with sunrise, priests speaking spells and making offerings at the exact instant when the sun's disk appeared over the horizon. For ordinary Egyptians, sunrise was daily reassurance. Each morning, when light returned, they knew the cosmic order held, that Ma'at prevailed, that the struggles of their own lives occurred within a universe that maintained its essential structure and benevolence. No matter how difficult an individual's circumstances, no matter what personal tragedies or hardships they faced, the sun rose. And that meant hope persisted, renewal remained possible, death would not be the final word. The king, the pharaoh, was especially connected to this daily rebirth. Pharaonic theology held that the king was the earthly manifestation of Horus, son of Osiris, legitimate ruler of Egypt. But the king was also associated with Ra, particularly with Ra's role as creator and sustainer of order. The pharaoh's daily activities, his ritual duties, his role in maintaining Ma'at through justice and proper governance, all paralleled Ra's cosmic activities. When the pharaoh died, he was believed to become one with Osiris in the underworld, but also to journey with Ra through the Duat and be reborn with him each morning. This created a complex theology where the deceased king was simultaneously a static presence in the underworld, merged with Osiris and a dynamic, recurring presence journeying with Ra. Egyptian thought was comfortable with these paradoxes, understanding that truth often required holding multiple perspectives simultaneously. For non-royal dead, those who successfully passed through judgment and were admitted to paradise, the nightly journey with Ra represented both literal experience and symbolic reality. The justified dead would literally sail aboard Ra's Barque, would literally face Apep, would literally celebrate the rebirth at dawn. But they would also simultaneously dwell in the field of reeds, the paradise where crops were always abundant and loved ones gathered in eternal peace. Both were true. Death opened multiple forms of continued existence, all of them real, all of them valuable. The cycle of Ra's journey, death leading to rebirth, darkness to light, ending to beginning, became the template for understanding all of existence. Seeds died to become plants. The Nile's floodwaters receded to reveal fertile fields. People died to be reborn in the afterlife. Every ending contained the potential for new beginning. Every loss carried the seed of future gain. Every darkness eventually yielded to light. This wasn't blind optimism. The Egyptians understood that the rebirth wasn't automatic, wasn't guaranteed except through constant effort. Ra had to fight through the Duat every night. The gods had to defend against Apep eternally. Humans had to maintain Ma'at through their daily choices. Rebirth was possible, was promised, but only if the work was done. The struggle maintained, the vigilance never relaxed. And so, each dawn was both triumph and reminder. Triumph because once again Ra had succeeded. Once again the sun rose. Once again creation was preserved for another day. Reminder because tonight the journey would have to be made again. Apep would attack again. The battle would be fought again. The victory would have to be won again. But that was acceptable, was even good, because it meant existence had purpose, that actions mattered, that the universe required participation rather than passive observation. Every sunrise was achievement, was victory earned through divine and human cooperation, was proof that order could prevail over chaos, that light could overcome darkness, that life could emerge from death. And as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, as its rays spread across the land, as its warmth began to chase away the night's chill, Egyptians would greet the new day knowing they had played their part, had contributed to the eternal struggle, had helped the sun god navigate the perils of the Duat one more time, and they would prepare to do it again, tonight and every night, forever, because that was what it meant to live in Ma'at, to maintain order, to keep the universe functioning as the gods had designed it, as Ra's victories each morning proved was possible. Legacy and meaning. The mythology of Ra's nightly journey through the Duat, his battle with Apep, and his daily rebirth was not peripheral to Egyptian civilization. It was central, foundational, shaping how Egyptians understood existence, death, morality, and their place in the cosmos. The impact of this mythology extended through every aspect of their culture, from the most exalted temple rituals to the daily activities of ordinary people, from the construction of pyramids to the telling of bedtime stories. Egyptian art and architecture were profoundly influenced by this cosmic drama. Royal tombs, particularly those of the New Kingdom pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings, had their walls covered with detailed illustrations and texts describing Ra's journey. The Amduat and other funerary texts weren't just written out. They were visualized, painted in vibrant colors that have survived millennia in the darkness of sealed tombs, each hour of the night depicted with its geography, guardians, and challenges. The tomb of Seti I, discovered by Giovanni Belzoni in 1817, features some of the most elaborate and well-preserved examples of these texts. As Belzoni descended into the tomb, his torch illuminating walls that had been dark for over 3,000 years, he encountered a complete cosmological map, a guide to the underworld rendered in stone and paint. The ceiling showed star constellations connecting the Duat to the heavens above, suggesting the underworld wasn't simply below, but permeated all of reality. These weren't decorations in the sense we might understand interior design. They were functional, magical texts and images designed to help the deceased king navigate his own journey through death. By having the Amduat carved on his tomb walls, the pharaoh ensured he would have the knowledge needed to follow Ra's path, to know the names of gates and guardians, to speak the words of power that would grant him passage through the 12 hours and achieve rebirth. But the influence extended beyond royal tombs. Common people, who couldn't afford elaborate decorated tombs, would be buried with copies of the Book of the Dead, papyrus scrolls containing spells and instructions for navigating the afterlife. Many of these spells dealt with Ra's journey, allowing the deceased to join the sun god's crew, to participate in the defense against Apep, to share in the ultimate victory of light over darkness. Temples across Egypt incorporated the mythology into their daily liturgies. We've discussed the rituals of lighting the fire and drawing the bolt, but these were just the beginning of a full day's ritual activities that constantly referenced and reenacted elements of Ra's cosmic journey. Priests would carry statues of gods in processions that mimicked the solar Barque's travels. They would speak spells at specific hours that corresponded to the hours of Ra's journey through the Duat. Every ritual action had cosmic significance, connecting the temple's activities to the eternal drama playing out in realms beyond human sight. The mythology also shaped Egyptian literature and wisdom texts. The concept that life was a journey, that difficulties were tests to be overcome, that death was not ending, but transformation, all drew from the central myth of Ra's nightly voyage. Stories told to children often featured themes of perseverance through darkness, of help from unexpected sources, of the ultimate triumph of good over evil, all echoing the nightly battle between Ra and Apep. Egyptian moral philosophy was inseparable from this cosmology. The maxims and instructions that survive from various periods consistently emphasize the importance of truth, justice, and order, of living in accordance with Ma'at. These weren't arbitrary moral dictates. They were cosmic necessities, ways of behavior that supported the fundamental structure of reality. To live justly wasn't just personally virtuous. It was contributing to Ra's defense, strengthening order against chaos, participating in the most important struggle in existence. The pharaoh's role in society was legitimized through connection to Ra's journey. The king was understood as the earthly representative of the sun god, responsible for maintaining Ma'at in the human realm, just as Ra maintained it in the cosmic realm. When the pharaoh made offerings to the gods, he was symbolically providing them with the strength to continue their eternal struggles. When he rendered judgments, he was acting as an agent of Ma'at, ensuring that order prevailed in human affairs as it must prevail in divine ones. This created a reciprocal relationship between cosmic and earthly order. If the pharaoh ruled justly, if he maintained Ma'at in Egypt, this supported Ra's battle against Apep. If chaos and injustice spread in the human world, if isfet gained ground in society, this made Apep stronger, made Ra's nightly victory harder. Everything was connected. There was no separation between religious, moral, political, and cosmic realms. All were aspects of the same fundamental reality, all influenced each other, all required constant attention and maintenance. The mythology also influenced Egyptian concepts of time. Unlike linear concepts where time progresses from past through present to future, in an unrepeatable sequence, Egyptian time was fundamentally cyclical. Ra's daily journey created the cycle of day and night, but it also established time's basic pattern. Death leads to rebirth, endings to new beginnings, darkness to light. This didn't mean Egyptians thought history simply repeated itself. Individual events were unique. But the patterns, the fundamental structures, the essential nature of existence, these were eternal, recurring, cyclical. This cyclical understanding of time had practical implications. It meant that the wisdom of the past remained relevant in the present, that traditional ways of doing things weren't outdated, but rather time-tested expressions of eternal truths. It meant that personal death, however tragic, was not an ending, but a transformation, participation in the cycle that Ra himself enacted every night. It meant that no matter how dark the present seemed, dawn was coming, rebirth was possible. Light would return. The influence of Egyptian cosmology, particularly the Ra and Apep mythology, extended beyond ancient Egypt itself. As Greek and Roman civilizations encountered Egyptian thought, they incorporated and adapted elements of it. The idea of a sun god journeying through an underworld appeared in various forms in Greco-Roman mythology. The concept of underworld geography divided into regions or hours influenced later Mediterranean and Near Eastern cosmologies. In Christian Egypt, during the Coptic period, elements of the old mythology persisted in transformed ways. The eternal struggle between light and darkness, good and evil, order and chaos, became identified with the conflict between God and Satan, between Christ and the devil. Apep itself, along with Set and other Egyptian deities associated with chaos, became merged in Christian demonology, their serpentine forms contributing to the image of Satan as serpent and dragon. Even the daily liturgy of Christian Egypt retained echoes of the old solar religion, with prayers and services timed to coincide with dawn, noon, and dusk, the critical moments in the sun's daily journey. The concept that human prayers and rituals could support divine struggles against evil forces persisted, though now framed in monotheistic rather than polytheistic terms. For modern scholars and students of mythology, the Ra and Apep story reveals much about how humans create meaning through narrative. The ancient Egyptians used this myth to explain natural phenomena. Yes, but more importantly, to create a cosmology that gave moral and existential significance to human life. It said that what we do matters, that our choices have cosmic implications, that existence itself depends on constant struggle and vigilance. The myth also demonstrates the sophistication of ancient Egyptian thought. These weren't primitive people telling simple stories to explain things they didn't understand. They were crafting complex, multi-layered narratives that operated simultaneously as literal description, symbolic representation, moral instruction, ritual guide, and existential exploration. Modern mythologists and theologians continue to study these texts, finding new layers of meaning, new insights into how humans understand themselves and their place in the universe. The fact that this mythology sustained Egyptian civilization for over 3,000 years speaks to its power and relevance. From the Old Kingdom through the New Kingdom, through periods of stability and chaos, foreign occupation and native renaissance, the core mythology of Ra's journey remained central. It adapted, evolved, incorporated new elements and interpretations, but never lost its essential character or fundamental importance. Today, the mythology continues to fascinate and inspire. Writers, artists, and filmmakers draw on Egyptian cosmology, though often simplified or modified for modern audiences. The image of a cosmic serpent threatening to devour the sun resonates across cultures, speaking to universal human fears about darkness, death, and chaos. The promise of rebirth after death, of renewal after darkness, remains as compelling now as it was millennia ago. And perhaps most profoundly, the central insight of the Ra and Apep mythology, that order requires constant defense, that existence depends on vigilance and effort, that even gods must struggle to maintain creation, speaks to truths that transcend time and culture. We still face chaos, still must work to maintain the structures and values that allow civilization to flourish, still must choose daily between actions that support order and those that feed chaos. The nightly battle between Ra and Apep, between light and darkness, order and chaos, continues in metaphorical form in every generation, in every society, in every individual life. And the Egyptian answer to that struggle remains relevant. Participate, defend what matters, maintain Ma'at through your choices and actions. Never assume that goodness and order will preserve themselves without effort, and trust that dawn will come if the struggle is maintained. Conclusion. As our journey through the Egyptian underworld comes to its close, as we ascend from the Duat back into the gentle darkness of your own room, let these images and ideas settle softly into your consciousness like silt after the Nile's flooding, enriching and nourishing your understanding of this ancient and profound mythology. We began with a hook, with the dramatic reality that every night, in the depths of an underworld invisible to human eyes, a battle was fought that determined the fate of creation. We've explored that battle in detail, traced Ra's journey through 12 hours of darkness, met the divine crew that defended him, understood the enemy that sought to destroy him, and witnessed the miracle of rebirth that made each dawn possible. But here's the final revelation, the twist that makes this 3,000-year-old mythology suddenly, shockingly relevant. The ancient Egyptians were describing something real. Not literally, of course. There is no serpent in an underworld. But they were describing, with startling psychological accuracy, the human experience of depression, anxiety, and the daily battle to maintain mental health and find meaning in existence. Think about it. Ra's journey from confident god to weakened, dying deity who needs help just to survive, who transforms into his ram-headed corpse form, who must pass through dissolution before reaching rebirth. This is the psychological experience of depression, of hitting rock bottom, of feeling so drained that you cannot continue without support. The seventh hour, when everything goes dark and Apep's hypnotic gaze paralyzes you, leaving you helpless and alone. This is an anxiety attack, a depressive episode, the moment when your own mind becomes your greatest enemy. And the solution the Egyptians offered? You cannot do it alone. You need defenders. You need community. You need rituals and practices that support you. You need people like Set, who refuse to be paralyzed when everyone else is frozen, who fight for you when you cannot fight for yourself. You need magic and meaning, not in the literal sense, but in the sense of frameworks that make your struggle significant, that connect your personal battle to something larger. The Egyptians understood that existence requires constant effort, that darkness returns every night regardless of yesterday's victories, that you will have to fight the same battles over and over, and that this isn't a flaw or failure, it's the nature of being alive. They understood that some days you won't be strong enough to save yourself, and that's when community and ritual and shared meaning become the difference between making it through the night and succumbing to chaos. Modern psychology has discovered that depression and anxiety are best treated through a combination of medication, external support, therapy, ritual frameworks for processing experience, community, the divine crew, and practices that create meaning. Ma'at, the maintenance of order through intentional action. The Egyptians knew this 3,000 years ago. They just described it in the language of mythology rather than psychology. But more than that, we've encountered a worldview, a way of understanding existence that saw reality as fundamentally cyclical, that understood order as something requiring constant defense, that believed individual actions had cosmic significance, and that found hope not in the absence of struggle, but in the possibility of triumph through effort. The ancient Egyptians are gone now, their civilization long since fallen, their temples in ruins, their written language forgotten until modern scholars rediscovered how to read hieroglyphics. But their myths survive, not as dead relics of a vanished culture, but as living insights into the human condition, into how we create meaning, face fear, and find hope in darkness. Every night, as you prepare for sleep, as darkness surrounds you and consciousness fades, you participate in your own journey through a personal underworld. The challenges you face aren't serpents and demons, but anxieties, regrets, fears, the chaos of your own mind. The ma'at you must maintain isn't cosmic order, but the balance of your own life, your commitments to truth and justice in your relationships and choices. The rebirth you seek isn't transformation into Khepri, but simply the renewal that each morning brings, the fresh start that every dawn offers. And in this metaphorical sense, the mythology remains true. Darkness does threaten. Chaos does press against order. The battles we fight, though internal and personal rather than cosmic and divine, are real and consequential. And the promise that Ra's journey offers, that death leads to rebirth, that darkness yields to light, that persistence through difficulty earns renewal, that promise remains as valid now as it was when Egyptian priests carved these texts on tomb walls 30 centuries ago. So rest now, knowing that you have touched something ancient and true, that you have walked paths that humans have walked in imagination for millennia, that you have encountered questions and answers that transcend any single culture or era. The sun will rise tomorrow, because it always has, because the cycle continues, because existence persists. And you will rise with it, renewed, ready to face whatever your day brings, carrying within you the wisdom of those long-ago Egyptians who understood that life is a journey, that darkness is temporary, that rebirth is possible, and that even the gods must struggle to maintain what they value. Sleep well, and may your own journey through the night bring you safely to dawn's light. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Egyptian underworld. If you enjoyed this exploration of Ra's nightly battle against Apep, please subscribe to Sleepable Mythology for more deep dives into ancient myths, legends, and the stories that shaped human civilization. Let us know in the comments which ancient Egyptian deity or myth you'd like us to explore next. May your dreams be peaceful and your journey through the night bring you safely to dawn. Good night.